Welcome to the FOD, where we bring you insights into the future of digital commerce for free. Season 5 is all about the move to composable architecture, and while it's not a buzzword anymore, there are still a number of unanswered questions, which is why I'm speaking to those who have the answers. In return, if you enjoy our content, we ask if you could like and share to spread the message far and wide. Hello, and welcome back to episode 8 and the final episode of season 5 of the FOD. I'd also like to welcome our first repeat guest, Mr. Kelly Goetsch. Kelly first joined the show back in 2021. We've come a long way since then, as has Kelly, who is now Chief Strategy Officer for commercetools, amongst other gigs, including a recent appointment as board member for Bluestone PIM. Welcome, Kelly. For those that don't know you, do you want to give a quick overview of your experience and then we can dive straight in?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I started my career with ATG, which was the leading commerce platform back in the 90s and 2000s. Did a ton of those initial launches back in the day when brands were getting online for the first time. And then spent 5 years at Oracle for product management. And my last year there, I led microservices. While at Oracle, I also wrote e-commerce in the cloud for O'Reilly. And I joined commercetools almost 8 years ago, which is hard to believe at this point, but it's been a long time, my entire 30s basically, and was CPO for 6 years, and now I'm doing a more external role as Chief Strategy Officer the past almost 2.
Nice. So I guess being at commercetools for the best part of 8 years, you've been at the forefront of the move to composable architecture, which is actually the theme of the podcast today. So, I mean, there's probably very few people that are better placed to have this conversation with and understand the growth of composable over that time and how the conversations have changed and everything else. So I guess let's dive straight in and say, Kelly, how have you seen the growth of composable over the past 10 years or so?
Composable has come out of, I would say it's a natural evolution. So when I started at commercetools in 2016, that for 2 years, the discussions I was having with big brands and retailers was, why on earth would you trust a public cloud for anything this sensitive? I want my data within my 4 walls, within my data center. The questions were, what is an API? What's a microservice? Where's the head? That was a common thing for a long time, because at that point, SAP Hybris really reigned supreme. Oracle Commerce, Demandware, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Magento, those were all brands that were just really, at the peak of their adoption, and people were still buying and installing those apps. And again, those are fine for the 2000s, but by that point, cloud had really taken off. APIs had really become a thing. Headless commerce was just getting started. So it was just interesting from 2016 to 18, roughly, how the discussion was, what is this and why? And then around 2019, 2020, 2021, that's when it really started to take hold. And I credit the MACH Alliance for a lot of this. I think we as an organization came together and really did something big and moved the industry. Gartner came out with a whole bunch of research around composability, which was great. And also the legacy products out there started to have real issues. Folks didn't want to use the whole thing. They wanted to use bits and pieces. They wanted to incrementally adopt. They wanted to build and buy, and they weren't able to do that. Those legacy platforms were really holding them back. And I'll give you an interesting, example. Most folks running those legacy platforms are releasing to production once a day. And those running more composable stacks, like our customers, are releasing to production 5, 10, 20 times a day. So to go from once a month to 20 times a day is just it's a huge difference.
It is huge.
You're at a disadvantage if you're not releasing that quickly, because to innovate, you have to iterate.
Not only do you get the increase in releases as well, you also lose the lengthy times of the upgrade process as well, where you're doing very little other than upgrading what you have. And when we know they can take 12, 18, in some cases, maybe 20, 24 months depending on the size of the business. So that agility in innovating as well is then held back. So it's interesting to see how you credited the MACH Alliance there. I mean, it's of my opinion that they've done a very good job in educating the audience, not just via webinars and what have you, but obviously via the main event as well, MACH 1, MACH 2, and MACH 3 obviously coming up soon. I only hear very good things about it. What impact do you think the MACH Alliance has had on the adoption of composable?
Well, we co-founded the Alliance. There were 5 of us, companies that co-founded it. And just full disclosure, I actually incorporated it and ran it for quite a while, 4.5 years. But the MACH Alliance does 3 things, basically. First is it's keeping the term MACH pure, M-A-C-H. And composable is a great business level term, but it doesn't really mean anything. And as evidenced by everyone out there in the world is now claiming to be composable with zero tie into what they actually do or don't do, right? It's just one of those terms that everybody is now magically composable, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But MACH is a pure term, and it's because we have a trademark on the term MACH. And to get into the Alliance, you have to go through a very stringent test. We have about a 65% rejection rate of new applicants. And those are folks who think that they're ready, and the Alliance finds that they're not. And there are technical and commercial requirements that have to be met in order to join the MACH Alliance. So
I've read a report actually on that within the last 6 months about the tests and the tasks that are both ISVs and also delivery partners need to undergo to be part of the MACH Alliance. So I've seen that firsthand. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one, and that really helps because now buyers understand what is and what isn't MACH. The second thing that we're doing is, as a consortium, a first of its kind, we're pooling the resources of all members to advocate and build out this category. So individually, we're all relatively small companies. commercetools is only 700 employees. But a lot of our members are 50 employees, 100, 200, 500. We're all smaller companies. And independently, I don't think we have a huge voice in the market compared to these giant, mega tech vendors out there with hundreds of thousands of employees and hundreds of millions of dollars of budget, the marketing side. But now the MACH Alliance is 104 members. Together, we're all pooling our resources and we're aligning around the same messaging, the same themes, the same thought leadership topics. And together as an industry, we're creating more safety, more demand, explaining to different personas what MACH is and why it's important. So we do CFO-focused content, we do CEO-focused content, we do developer-focused content. It's very targeted for different personas and helping them understand at each level, what the benefits of MACH are and why it's important. And then the third thing we do is a lot of community. So we bring together folks from across the MACH universe, and we do hackathons together. We do lots and lots of events. So any given week, we do 2, 3, 4 events somewhere around the world. We have our big flagship conference, as you mentioned. What else do we do? A lot of work around standards and aligning on the commercial side as well. So generally, as a community, we're coming together for networking purposes, but also to make our products easier to consume together. And we're really building those relationships that matter out there. So those are the 3 things that the MACH Alliance specifically has done to make MACH a reality out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say the community is certainly getting stronger every year. You touched upon something right at the end there around making it easier for the members to not only communicate together but also work together. I guess which kind of leads me on to talking a bit about some of the connectors or the connector that commercetools released. We also see in accelerators, which whilst different to both Connect and Foundry, they form as I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, a similar connector, but putting the pieces of the puzzle together in making it easier for the end customer to see ROI quicker with the vendors talking to each other. How much of an impact do you feel like these things have had in the adoption of composable?
It's made it a lot easier. So the challenge is the perception. And I think this is 95% a perception thing, that composable is hard. And compared to a Shopify or somebody of that stature, which is much more of a website in a box, it is harder than that. Now, I don't think it's that difficult. Our biggest customers have maybe a dozen people working on the implementations. These are not huge teams. These are not huge projects. But we as a vendor are doing anything we possibly can to make this all easier. And one of those initiatives is Foundry. And Foundry is a pre-composed in a box opinionated way to consume commerce tools. And it's a much more off the shelf, ready to go Magento or Shopify style use of our product. And that's not necessarily down market. It is, but it's also for large organizations that want to get going quickly for a small divisional application of some sort. We see a lot of that type of use, which is great. And part of Foundry and a general new initiative we've been spending a lot of time on at commercetools is the Connect integration. And what Connect allows you to do is very quickly and easily connect between commercetools and a lot of our top tier partners. And what's special about this and what differentiates it from our normal marketplace is we as a vendor are attaching an SLA to it and we're running it as a service. So our traditional marketplace and the standard out there is to say, here's some code, go run it and have fun, right? And that's great. And it's better than writing an integration from scratch. But what Connect does is it realizes there are a couple dozen partners out there that have the majority of our customers' business. And we're going to make it really, really easy and seamless. And you click a couple buttons, you put in an API key and you're good to go, right? Very simple, streamlined. And we as commercetools are managing it on a multi-tenant basis with an SLA attached to it. So it makes it even easier. And that's a key part of Foundry.
Okay. I think from where I'm sat, it sounds like it's definitely been beneficial. I know from the tens of conversations I've had in the past, one of the biggest challenges end customers face in the move to composable is enabling the business to see ROI quickly. And I think maybe if you go back a couple of years when we were kind of learning as we go, unlocking that ROI fast was probably slightly harder than it is now. And I guess some of these tools and accelerators and what have we been discussed have enabled that to happen so much quicker now. So it makes the buy-in from those that need it, which is pretty much everyone in the business, much easier.
Well, we're going through a change in who is buying composable at this point. And in 2017, 18, 19, that was the early adoption crowd. And these organizations are very technically sophisticated, very competent. They knew what they wanted, and they bought us as vendors because it offered a real competitive advantage relative to the legacies out there. And if all the competition is deploying once a month to production, and an early customer of ours is deploying 20 times a day, that obviously is a pretty big competitive differentiator, which is great. And those customers, and I'm gonna dramatically oversimplify here, but those customers said, "Awesome tech, we understand what you do. Let's sign, buy, and then commerce tools go away." Right? We're buying commerce tools independently. We know what we're doing. You're a tool vendor for us. Awesome product, but we don't really need any help. And that's great, but that is a very narrow segment of the tech adoption bell curve. And now what we're moving into is the more mainstream mass market buyer. And they're not buying because our tech is cool. They're buying because we specifically very easily solve business problems. And they don't even necessarily know what a microservice is. They don't care. What they want to see is a stamp that we're MACH certified, kind of like when you buy a house and it's passive certified, for example. The certification makes a difference, and that's great. but they're not looking at the details. They don't care about the, GraphQL specification that we support. Like they just don't care. That's not
Mm.
of their concern. What they want is they've got a big list of requirements. Most of those are non-technical requirements, and they want to check, check, check all the way through an RFP. And we uniquely solve those problems.
Okay, so one thing that I would love to know the answer to then is uh, do you feel as though there needs to be a certain level of digital maturity within a customer in order for them to move away from maybe an out-of-the-box platform or a monolith towards composable architecture? The reason I ask is, again, I've had a few guests in the past that have said they feel as though maybe if the business isn't mature enough from a digital perspective, this might be a bit too much for them to take on board.
I would say largely you do not need technical skills at this point, but there's a weird selection bias that happened. And what happened is in the early days of this space, you had super sophisticated, mature organizations. And newer entrants to the space, big brands and retailers and telcos and others, would look at themselves relative to those early adopters and say, I'm nowhere near that sophisticated. Therefore, I'm not ready for this yet. And this has always been easy, right? It's always been very straightforward to use. So I would say it is becoming easier through Foundry. It's becoming easier through Connect. There are a lot more people with these skills on the market. There are a lot more cloud certified developers, commercetools certified developers. The MACH Alliance has helped out with a lot of the streamlining and simplification and alignment on the commercial side. So just generally, it's become a lot easier to use all of these products together. So I would say you have to care a little bit and you have to have a little bit of maturity, but I would say that bar is coming down earlier. Now, I should say we're never going to be as simple as a pull out your credit card and go to Shopify and get a, monthly plan
Mm.
type of an experience, right? That's not us. And by definition, I'm happy that that's not us because we uniquely solve very complicated problems, but we can also be used in that manner as well. So you're going to have to do a little bit. And I'll give you an example. I have a good friend here in my local town in Wisconsin who runs a shoe company, and they do 450 million a year wholesale. And they wanted to do a direct to consumer channel because they have Walmart knocking off their shoes, and they're starting to get cut out, and they have a very strong brand and they want to sell direct to consumer. And that's great. And he took me out to lunch and he started asking me questions. And he said, "What do I need to get started?" And I said, "Well, do you have an OMS?" And he said, "What's an OMS?" I said, "Okay, let's play a 10 questions game here. Do you have a CMS? What's a CMS?" And he just had no idea, right? It's as an organization, they have zero maturity, and they're really
Mm.
good on the manufacturing side and on the branding side. But in terms of IT, in terms of how to go to market, that's just not going to be our customer. And they're probably not going to get online for a long time. And that's fine. But that's where a chunk of the market is. And that's pretty impenetrable by all of us as vendors.
And it sounds like they're right at the bottom end of that. Like you said, if they have no understanding of OMSs and CMSs, then yeah, I mean, I guess something like this would probably be a bit biting off a bit more than you can chew, right? But
Yeah.
there's very few company. Well, I say very few. There's going to be thousands of companies that are like that, but they certainly form the fewer percent of the market share than those that do have some technical maturity. Interesting, the bar's getting lower with the tools and what have you that have been discussed. In your opinion, would you say there is a certain cutoff or a certain type of business outside of ones with absolute zero maturity that wouldn't benefit from being on composer being as a composable architecture or not?
A lot of the direct to consumer fashion brands, if you're a famous celebrity and you have 5 SKUs and you're selling, you know, makeup or a perfume or something, like that's not our customer.
Mm.
Right? We're certainly happy to take their money, but like that is much more of a point and click experience. You could build that entire experience in an afternoon. And we certainly have customers like that, and that's fine, and that's a great business, but that's not really what we do. We handle uniquely the complex side of e-commerce exceptionally well. So that's lots of products, tens of millions of products. It's product complexity, so supporting different attributes, lots of products per cart. It's multi-site, multi-brand, multi-currency, multi-country. It's using pieces and parts as opposed to here's a whole thing that you have to use or not use. So it's a different approach, one that's, I think, a lot better. And again, we've made it dramatically easier to use this new approach. And that's why we're seeing such a huge uptick, even above our 2021, 2022 growth today
Okay,
in 2024.
nice. So that's really good to hear. You mentioned about how the um, Commerce Tools delivered it exceptionally well, and obviously Commerce Tools is in my opinion, the pioneer from a platform perspective of the move towards composable. There are now other platforms that get involved in the journey. So my next question is by no means aligned just to Commerce Tools, but more about the move to composable in general. But it's safe to say that whilst the early adopters have gone through the challenges over the last sort of 4, 5, 6 years, there's been a number of challenges that they faced, and in some cases, there's been some transformations that have failed. And what would be good to know from you, Kelly, is in your opinion, why do you think the number one reason is that composable transformations fail?
First, I would say it's awfully rare, and it's less than half of the traditional failure rate. And I can't get into specifics, but we have a very, very, very high gross revenue retention rate. It's the highest I've ever seen in our category. So, and I think all but one or two customers, it was due to their own bankruptcy, not ours. But the challenge I see is many, especially retailers, are exceptionally dysfunctional organizations. Um, some really have their act together, and that's great, but there are an awful lot of them that have competing, warring factions internally. They have staff who are reluctant to make changes. Um, a lot of different people have different entrenched interests. They go out and hire SIs that they probably shouldn't be hiring, that are misaligned with this whole composable movement that they've bought into. They have unrealistic expectations. Um, they have lots and lots and lots of legacy that they can't or don't want to interface with this new world. And a lot of it is, I mean, I just see this every day. You know, we have super happy, successful customers, but in the case where there are challenges, it's 99% of the time, it's just internal. It's an internal problem. And retailers especially are just so cost conscious that they end up underinvesting in talent sometimes. And for whatever reason, they are poor at any large IT project, commerce included, commerce especially.
Commerce is complex,
I
right?
hate to blame our customers, but I mean, look, it's the truth of the matter here.
It,
Sometimes it happens.
it does, and I would say 90% or more of the people that I've spoken to over the last couple of years have all mentioned in one way or another the dysfunctionalness of the retailers, whether it be having everybody on the same page and communicating properly, or having the business fully bought in and actually everyone in the business knowing the journey that's ahead of them and the challenges that they're going to face and how they're going to overcome them and what's going to come afterwards. And also even knowing what success even looks like, right? Because, I mean, arguably, when you go through this transformation, the success comes later down the line when you
Right.
can not need to re-platform again, for example, or you can push out 20 times a day, for example.
There's this famous security researcher named Rob Graham, very, very well-known guy out there. And he did a blog post that I still look back to on a regular basis. And the blog post is, why do companies hire such awful CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, right? Why do they do that? And he made the point that most companies are run by people who have no idea what security looks like. So it would be like if I asked you to go build a veterinary practice and go hire a bunch of veterinarians, right? Are you going to know how to build and hire and look for one? No, right? If I'd
Definitely not.
you to go hire, you know, an architect, how are you going to know besides some renderings of work they've done, like what makes a good architect, what makes a good billing claims analyst for a healthcare company, right? And it's just, you end up with a lot of finance types and CFOs in charge of large retailers because of PE ownership. And inevitably, somebody with a finance background is not going to know how to hire a really good CTO. And they end up making, in a lot of cases, poor hires for technical roles. The other problem is, tech talent's expensive these days.
It
Good
is.
in the US at least, a solid architect is 250, 350K a year, right? It's a lot of money. And for retailers used to paying their employees 10, 12, $15 an hour, and even VPs, if you look around an organization, look at a VP of finance, a VP of HR, you might have an individual contributor architect making way more than, VP in some other function. So tech talent really messes with an organization's comp structure. And many retailers, especially retailers, just don't. They'll offer 80K salaries and think that that's plenty. And it's not. It's not. You're not going to hire the right people for that.
We find that happens a lot, particularly with the enterprise organizations where they've got solid structures in place already, where it's like your grade A, grade B, grade C. This person can't be a certain grade because that's where the manager sits. But it's like, okay, well, there needs to be a little bit of flexibility here. When we have these conversations on a weekly basis with companies and they go to market looking for somebody 25% lower than what the market's paying that person. And then we get well, they should want to work for us because we're a great business. It's like, it doesn't quite work that way.
No, it does not at all. And, the other thing is with tech talent, given how productive each person can be, and given how especially generative AI makes us all more productive in the tech space, you don't need that many people. You can have a big brand with $5 billion in GMV running with a 10 or 20 person team. And those hires are going to be more expensive, but you're not hiring 100 of them, right? That's the key. You should be hiring really smart, really senior people who can plumb things together and build only when necessary, rather than just hiring hundreds and hundreds of people across different IT functions. It's a different world than we're used to.
So going back to the question then and the conversation that you're having with these businesses, we seem to focus on retail, but it doesn't necessarily have to be retail. If there was one of those challenges that you feel crops up the most out of all the ones that have been discussed, what would you say it is?
Around the lack of composable
Just
adoption, is that it?
yeah, would you say it's the dysfunctionalness in general? Is it the reluctance to make change? Is it the unwillingness to invest in the right people?
I don't think this is a problem unique to composable, but what I see is that um, folks know they have a problem. They're running on something very antiquated. They know it's not optimal. They know it doesn't work very well. They have all sorts of clearly articulated business challenges, but until it's on fire, they're not going to change it. And a lot of it goes back to internal incentives within an organization. If you're the person who puts your neck on the line and says, we're going to do a big, transformation over the next 5 years, and even if you go slow, you still have to get a lot of money, typically from a board. You have to tell all of your business stakeholders that their features are going to be delayed at some point. And again, if you do it right, it's not a huge delay, but there's always going to be some impact there, even if it means very positive foundation for long-term success. Um, and if it goes wrong, and any large transformational project within an existing enterprise can go wrong, it happens.
Hmm.
The person who put their neck on the line is the one who gets fired for it. And I think it's terrible how companies do that, but that's the way things work. And it's a tough market right now. So folks are loath to put their name on something that for any reason whatsoever could fail. You could have another COVID and all the budgets get completely restricted. You could have slowdown in business for other reasons, for the economic reasons, for maybe the merchandising team, is not delivering, and all of a sudden there's a slowdown, and then your budget gets put on hold or halved, right? That happens. And unless it's burning down, people don't want to change. And what's great for us as vendors is we're now to the point where people have had those legacy platforms installed for 15, 20 years. They've had the pain. And we're starting to see, especially this year, boards really changing and approving funding and hiring leaders, capital L leaders to go in and make these changes. But that's been slowing us down the past couple of years when people were a little bit unsure, is there going to be a recession? Is there not? People were watching the, capital expenditures. And I think it feels like we finally turned the tide on that. And a lot of budget is now getting released, and we're back in business again in 2024.
Nice. Do you feel as though it's almost like the next generation has taken the step into leadership? And I was speaking to somebody before, and they felt as though as a new generation moves into a leadership position, they almost bring with it a slight air of like risk, to know that risk brings reward. But I think a lot of it comes from a company's ethos and whether or not they embrace failure, right? Because like you said, you shouldn't get fired for trying to do something new if it's the right thing to do. It may or may not work. There's a whole host of different factors that can go into it.
Yeah, no, that's true. And look, there's generally a maturity that's taking place in the market. We've had e-commerce now for basically 30 years, coming up on 30 years. And that's a long enough time that people have built entire careers around this. And there are lots of good people out there now who you could bring in as a CIO or CTO or CEO who have really solid e-commerce experience, right? Way, way, way more than 20 years ago. So there is a new generation. Also, the 20, 30 somethings now working at most of these organizations are digitally native themselves. And as they move into more senior leadership positions, they're changing the culture. So in a B2B organization, for example, somebody who says, oh, let's make people call into a call center to place an order, 20 or 30 something year old is going to say, no way in hell am I going to have to call in and give my email and authenticate my account and, talk to somebody and have them place an order for me. I want to do it myself the same way that I buy stuff on Amazon, right? That's how I'm going to be purchasing supplies for my business. That's what they want. So a lot of it's generational as well, and that's
Yeah.
changing.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of opportunity in some of those B2B sectors like manufacturing, for example, which need to go through that transition as they start to hire more digitally native people, or have hired over the previous few years, and then they need to bring that change to replicate it as well. Like you said, people just don't pick up the phone and call to make orders anymore.
There's
Um,
some beautiful math to an actuarial table at some point, isn't there?
Say that again, sorry.
There's
There's
some
a,
beautiful math to an actuarial table at some point, isn't there?
yeah, if there is. The next question then, Kelly, I guess is going to be an interesting one, because you sit in obviously vendor side and have done for some time now. I'm sure you're involved in many conversations where people are asking for your opinion on SIs and how they should go around it. So if you were sat top of the table at the end customer and picking the SI to assist you through your transformation, what would be the number one thing that you would check before finalizing who you worked with?
Um, I think it's two things. First is the staffing model that the SI uses. The old school way of doing this was you'd get hundreds of developers. And when I was doing ATG projects, some of these projects had literally hundreds of people working on them. That's ridiculous. It was then, it is especially today. With this new world, you need a few really educated people who can work with APIs, events, functions. It is dramatically easier than it ever used to be. So staffing model is one. And I would like to see a dozen, 2 dozen people, high skilled, um, preferably on site if possible. I do think there's a real value to getting people together in a room and working together.
It's a hot
So
topic
that's,
right now, that's for sure.
yeah, that's number one. And the second is I like to see accountability in some way. And we work with some SIs at commercetools where if they screw up a commercetools implementation, we're going to have a really hard conversation with them, and that could severely impair their ability to ever get work in our ecosystem again. And we go to specific SIs in many cases because we know that they are 100% committed as a company. You know, if one of their customers is having a problem, their CEO will fly in, go to headquarters, sleep on the floor, and eat pizza to get that customer live and successful. And thankfully, that doesn't happen. We're in a pretty low drama world on implementations at this point, and things are much easier than they used to be. But we want to know that if, because our software is tied to the implementation, if the implementation does not go well, that doesn't end well for us.
Mm.
So we need SIs who 100% deliver and have built a reputation for having 100% success rate. And over time, that's resulted in us having, it's a relatively confined list. You know, we make sure that when we are working with someone, it's done, we're working with folks who we are 100% positive can deliver. And if for whatever reason there's a customer satisfaction issue or something doesn't go well, we prune them out of our partner list. That's how it works.
And
So the
that,
incentives are aligned for us to have successful implementations, is what I'm saying.
yeah, and for sure. But you're fortunate enough now to have uh, been involved in many and have worked alongside many of these SIs to get a feel for how they approach it, how they deal with problems, and whether or not the CEO would fly over and sleep on the floor and eat pizza, for example, right? But how if you didn't have that kind of knowledge behind you, I guess would you be the questions that you would ask them? Would it be the case studies that you would check, or how would you get to that standpoint?
I'd like to see MACH Alliance membership. I think that says quite a bit. I'd like to see accelerators and what work has been done there to build out IP. Um, I like to see leadership of an SI being very technical themselves. So an architect turned, owner of a smaller SI, something I really like to see.
Okay.
Um, I like to see salespeople who are much more technical and more solution focused, as opposed to the, old school, blazer wearing, backslapping, let's go out to a steak dinner kind of sales people. Um, I like to see a specialization in some tech, whether that's GraphQL or React or whatever it happens to be. I like to see SI partnerships, or sorry, ISV partnerships with our other ISVs in the ecosystem.
Okay.
It's a relatively insular world. There are the same, let's call it 6, 7 ISV partners that show up in deal after deal after deal. We want to see that our SI partners have interactions and good partnerships and engagements with them as well. We like to see innovation, and I mean like actual real innovation. And it's great when we have an SI come to us and say, did you think about this product feature? Here's an MVP of that feature.
Okay.
We like to see that. And another thing
Uh,
is we just like good people. We're all human, and there are certainly some SIs that just have amazing employees and executives that we like to work with. And life is too short to be working with jerks.
that it is. That it is. Unfortunately, there's still plenty out there. um,
Yes.
but I mean, along this, there, I like the fact that you ended it on we're all human and we want to work with good people. I think that's often a very undervalued part of partner selection. And I know from previous conversations that there's been some of our guests, they've actually picked their partners at both vendor and delivery partners based on their culture and whether or not they believe they would support them when times got tough in the transformation. Interesting. The long list there are lots of useful parts. Let's go back to the positive side of things. And when you're speaking to customers, what are the top three things that you would advise any end customer to do before starting their journey?
I'd say the first thing is to ensure that you have internal alignment, because I still on occasion see an organization where the tech side of the house decides to go forward, but business hasn't been bought in yet, or finance hasn't been brought in, or whatever it happens to be. So first is, alignment. Second, I'd like to see organizations better define what should be built and what should be bought. And what I mean by that is we at commercetools can be used in two ways. First is you could just use us off the shelf as a snap-in replacement for a Shopify or somebody like that, and that's fine. But our larger customers especially, there's a delineation there between what we do and what they should do. So they should find out what makes them them, what makes them unique, what's their competitive differentiation, what do they do that we do not do? And for things that are not unique to their business, they should be buying those things a la carte from us and from other MACH Alliance members. Things like shopping cart, right? You're not going to differentiate on a shopping cart at this point. Content management, we still see organizations try to build their own CMS. It's like, why? Why bother with that? Loyalty. We've got great vendors out there, one vendor specifically that does loyalty really well. So what we'd like to see is more focus on what is the competitive differentiation. And then the third thing we'd like to see is having alignment on how they select vendors. And we still see some organizations come forward with a big procurement team that is entirely non-technical, and they will deliver, and I'm not joking, they'll deliver 1,000-question RFP to us.
1,000, wow, okay.
Which is like, why? What's the point, right?
Seems a bit overkill.
It's ridiculous. And they'll spend 18 months making a selection. And I get it, they're box checking, but they're not buying forklifts for a warehouse. Right? This is far more strategic than that. And the torture that they put us as vendors through really gets frustrating over time. And I don't mean to whine, I don't, but some organizations are just, again, going back to that dysfunction I'm talking about. When we get 1,000 RFP, 1,000-question RFP, and it's sent from procurement, like that to us says, do these guys even know what they want, right? Are they mature enough to do anything? Not even alone us, but are they mature enough to do anything? And it's going to be a slog. We make it work, and we certainly come to the table and, put our best foot forward, but like tech doesn't work that way anymore. It just doesn't.
That 1,000-question RFP has also gone out to all of the competitors as well, and that process is going to take ridiculously long.
They're just not understanding it. And look, I'm fine if it's a couple months. I'm fine if it's a couple hundred questions, but we've had enough time on the market and there are enough resources available to narrow that list down pretty quick. And you should, after a couple meetings, pretty quickly figure out what you want. This isn't some crazy new experimental LLM, right? This is, we've had commerce platforms for 30 years. It's a really well-defined category. We've got a handful of leaders that show up as leaders in the Magic Quadrant year after year after year after year. And some just do this very uneducated spray and pray approach of vendor selection. And it just, again, it goes back to us looking at that as a vendor and saying, well, is this a customer we even want?
Yes.
Right.
Headache incoming, multiple headaches incoming, right?
It is. And it's so, I could write a book on the dysfunction I see at retailers. But again, for every one I see that's dysfunctional, I see 5 that really, really have their act together. And sometimes you'll talk to a CIO or CDO or CTO, and you're like, this person gets it. This is going to go just fine. This is going to be great. Awesome partnership. And there's certainly a lot of organizations out there that at this point really have their act together as well. But I just see so much variability in the maturity, the function, just everything in retailers. Personalities, who they're hiring and promoting, the ownership structures of these organizations and what that means, the SI relationships, the ISV partnerships they have. There's so much variability out there.
Something I hear very often with some of the more established retailers anyway, is people will join them and they'll say that they're sat in a meeting with the CDO or whoever it might be, and they're asking them a really insane question. And it's like, well, how has this person even got to the role of CDO? And it turns out that they've been there for 25 years and they started in one role and they've just kind of been promoted due to longevity in the business. And I mean, it's no coincidence that more often than not, those are the companies that have problems later down the line. We're seeing it far less now, but it's certainly something I heard a lot of over the last 10 years.
It's called Peter Principle.
Peter Principle, I've not heard that before.
You rise to your level of incompetence. You get to be a really, really, really good developer, and then you get promoted to an architect, which you may or may not be any good at. And then let's say you're a really good architect, and then you get promoted to an engineering manager. Well, then you're not a good engineering manager, but that's where you're stuck career-wise because you don't want to step down again to architect.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and you see that in the executive side as well, where people get promoted and promoted and promoted until they hit a job where they just aren't any good anymore at that job.
But they stay there because they get paid well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, it's definitely, it's like I said, we're not seeing it so much now, but certainly had many a story on that basis over the last 10 years. Um, which probably how we've got to the state where we are with some of the big retailers that are struggling. But hey, there's probably a story for another day, I guess. So I guess let's wrap this up then, Kelly. So where do you see the market going from here?
Composable is very much mainstream now. People are, in many cases, only considering composable platforms, which is great. The legacies are dying off. And over time, I think we're going to end up in a market where it's just two or three of us that gain an outsized market share in the same way that when cloud became a thing, you end up now with three vendors at scale, GCP, AWS, Azure. Those three vendors at scale get 95% of the market share. And we saw the same thing back in the day. It was Hybris and ATG and WebSphere Commerce, and then later
Mm,
Demandware. And we're seeing the same dynamic now where it's just a couple of us in the market. And I think that's a great thing for us is because we happen to be in that list and leading that list. So we're going to see further consolidation. I think there are a lot of second and third tier platforms out there that are going to get merged with CMSs or go away entirely or turn into more lifestyle businesses, and that's fine as well. So I just think we're really mainstream now, and this is just going to continue to be even bigger. And we've got years and years of growth. We're at about a 13% compound annual growth rate. E-commerce as a percent of total retail in the US at least is only like 16%. I know in the
okay.
UK it's like 35%. In like Korea, for example, it's what, 50%, somewhere in that neighborhood. So we've got a lot of growth ahead of us as an industry.
Mm.
And I'm looking forward to continuing with this.
Yes, and an interesting point you raise about the consolidation because right now, particularly in the UK, there are the most commerce platforms that I've ever seen. There's constantly new platforms trying to break into the UK market. Recently, we've had Scale, we've had Shopline, you've got Commerce Layer. Obviously, there's big commerce Shopify. You name it. There's probably 10 like relatively well-known names trying to break into the UK commerce space right now. So. I feel some consolidation would be good in your opinion. Obviously, commercetools is going to be the front runner of all of this, right? But who else do you feel would be the bigger challenges to commercetools? Let's say.
Well, first, I'm a big believer in the old saying that value is created by what is different, not what is incrementally better. And there's so many platforms now entering the UK market. And I get it, it's the UK, it's a very special market, but it, and I think many of them are fine offerings, but that's not enough. It's not enough just to have a reasonable offering. You have to have something that is fundamentally different, not something that is just incrementally better. And they, in many cases, are not either. They're not better because they're brand new to the market and they don't have years of feature development. And they're certainly not fundamentally different. So they're kind of in a tough spot, and I think they're just going to negotiate prices all the way down until they get put out of business. And that's fine. I think, and I've coached some of these platforms to find a niche of some sort. Way too many of them just try to enter the broad mass market. And I think that's going, headfirst into a buzzsaw if you do that, because what's your niche? And I'll give you examples. If you do med tech, somebody should build a HIPAA platform for med tech. And we've got some pretty big plans in that space. But that would be interesting if you did one for automotive, if you did one for B2B manufacturers on Azure in the Midwest, that would be really interesting. High-end fashion, but like you've got to find a problem that you uniquely solve really, really well. It's not enough just to be another platform entering the mass market of UK retailers, right? That doesn't work. You've got to find that niche. And our niche for a long time was headless, right? That's the one thing we did. We invented headless. We were pioneers in it. That's our thing, right? And that allowed us, it goes back to the old book, Crossing the Chasm. That allowed us to cross the chasm. That was our bridge across, right? But so many don't have that differentiation. And then to your question about who else, I really see, I think the big one's going to be Shopify. And I've seen them poke their head into our market here and there, but generally speaking, we're still in different markets selling to different customers, and they sell really well to the SMBs. They sell really well to the influencer brands. And I think they're a different business than ours. They are making the vast majority of their revenue from skimming payments and forcing their brands into using Shop Pay. And for SMBs, I think that's just fine. But I think that's going to limit them as they go up in enterprise, because I know they really want those big retailers to use Shop Pay, and it's expensive. It's 3.5%. And on top of that, there's a per transaction fee. And that adds up. A lot of our customers are down to 1.5%, transaction fees with their PSPs. And that's a big difference. That's a really big difference in
That's a
price.
huge difference, yeah. When you're doing millions and tens of millions of transactions, right? If more than that.
So I think their reliance on payment volume and their ability to monetize that is in direct opposition to what enterprises want. I also think they have some work to do on the product to get to that point. It's going to take some quality work there, not insurmountable. And I'm not going to discount them as a team. I think they're fantastic, but I think their commercial model and their product are fundamentally misaligned with what big enterprises need, and that's where we uniquely sell down market as well, and it's great. But our sweet spot is the complex multinationals, the enterprises.
So what they need then is someone like you to head over there, help them with their product itself, and take them into the next stage, right?
Dirk would fly to Wisconsin and strangle me if I left, so I cannot and would not do that to him.
No. I mean,
Such a
it's
thing called
interesting.
loyalty in our business.
Yeah, and it's great when you can see that, right? You with Oracle for many years, and you've been with commercetools now for nearly 8, and it'd be really interesting to see what the next 8 years bring, right? Because there's, as you said earlier, there's so much more that commerce can go, so much further commerce can go. Sorry. So I know we're tight for time, but just wanted to ask you one final question, and is that, in your opinion, will we start to see CRMs and ERPs broken down in a similar way over the next couple of years?
Let's hope so. That is the oldest, nastiest tech. And what's interesting is any company founded in roughly the past 10 years is almost by definition MACH compliant. And you can tell a lot by a MACH Alliance applicants' acceptance rate just purely based on their founding date. If they are past 10 years, you'd have to script pretty hard not to be MACH compliant if you were built in the past decade. So we as a company like to see organizations, we like to partner with relatively newer founded organizations because their tech aligns better with ours. And we do partner with some newer ERPs and CRMs that are more native MACH and more cloud-based. So yes, I fully expect to see it. Software lasts for 20, 30, 40 years, if that. I think on the commerce platform side, they've had roughly a 20, 25-year lifespan, and that's great. And on the ERP side and CRM side, we see the same dynamic. It's 20, 25 years, maybe 30, maybe 40 if you're really pushing it. But, a lot of that stuff was put in the 80s. So
we're getting to that
we're getting
point.
there. We're getting there. And then just naturally, they will switch to newer vendors, which by definition are mock based.
Nice. All right. We'll watch this space then, and I'm going to connect you with somebody after this because I know he's very keen to get involved in that next wave of CRMs. So I'll tell him to get in touch.
That's good.
But Brill, well, look, thank you so much for your time, Kelly. I know you're a busy man, but I mean, as always, share some great insights. One of the most educated people in the space, in my opinion. So I really appreciate you putting a bit of time aside to join me and talk through the move to composable and everything else that we've discussed today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And to our listeners, thank you for joining again. I hope you enjoyed the episodes. And if you can like, share, subscribe, and post across your network, if it can help one person make the right decision when it comes to digital transformation, it's doing its job. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.